Hello, my name is Everett Deibler, and I am currently enrolled in the Transition Master's Program here at George Washington University. And Dr. Green has asked me to talk about independent living and from a couple different angles about the history of independent living and then what are centers for independent living and how can they really help you as a transition professional. But I am a person with a disability and have been my entire life. I have cerebral palsy and I've been fortunate enough to work at a Center for Independent Living or a CIL or CIL for the last 3 years. Um, some of you, depending on what state you live in, may hear CILs be called ILCs. You may hear different terms for them, but typically they're called Centers for Independent Living. My CIL is located in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Lehigh Valley Center for Independent Living. My primary job there is to coordinate a grant project that is looking at leadership based education and aligning leadership based education lessons to the Common Core standards that are used in Pennsylvania, but then also looking at promoting leadership skill development for all kids across Pennsylvania. However, that being said, I'm also aware of the services that we provide and what um, a lot of our staff do in terms of providing services and what kind of things that we deal with at the Center for Independent Living every day. So I hope you learned something new, and I hope that this um, lecture encourages you to look at your local Center for Independent Living and try to find ways to connect and understand they're out there and a part of it. Now, this lecture is not going to be entirely me just up here dancing around, doing things, talking to you like this. I just wanted you to be able to see me and know who's actually talking to you. I am going to go through PowerPoint. There are going to be times where I'm going to ask you to look at videos and consider questions. And then we're going to get back to a time when you're going to see me again talking about the day to day for a person who works at a Center for Independent Living. All right, so with that said, I'm going to start a screen share um, to show you this presentation that I did. And so here we go. So again, the history of Centers for Independent Living and how they can help you by me. Shameless plug. All right. So what's our focus going to be? Like I said, we're going to look at the history of the independent living movement, and it wasn't always the prettiest. What do we mean when we say the word independent living? For a lot of people, there are different definitions, but in terms of the disability rights movement and independent living, there is a way to really interpret the word independent living. What are centers for independent living, and why is this information that I'm telling you so important to you as a transition professional? And to help you kind of understand how they can help you, we're going to look at what does a typical day at a CIL look like um, for workers there. What kind of challenges do we face? What do we see on a daily basis? Those type of things. So here we go. And before I get started, and this is really a section that's devoted to history, many Americans, whether you work in special education, you work at a vocational rehabilitation facility, you work for some university, wherever you may be, a lot of people are not aware of the history and the ongoing advocacy that happens to promote and ensure equal rights for people with disabilities. So the first section of this is really probably going to be some new information, and if it's not new, somewhat of a refresher too, and hopefully a new perspective. So looking at society, common reactions to people with disabilities. And a lot of these common reactions have been taught across society for such a long time. They're almost like entrenched in the way people view disability. And sometimes it can be Um, I, and you look at these words on the screen, they appear to be negative, and a lot of people focus on what people with disabilities cannot do or can't do. They focus on their limitations. And I encourage you to not do that. Um, Looking at ways to empower young people, ways to empower people with disabilities to achieve their dreams, not really focusing on assessments and seeing what someone is not able to do, but focusing on what are the strengths. Yes, there may be needs and things, but I would encourage you to look at what are the strengths of a person and how can they be accentuated and brought out. Another common reaction is fear. I experience this all the time, and I'm not saying people run away from me screaming, things like that. So it's not that kind of fear. It's more of a fear of the unknown. They just don't understand um, a person with a disability, so they're afraid to ask questions. They may be afraid to come near someone. This happens a lot in the grocery store. You go down the aisle with a shopping cart. Somebody sees you in a wheelchair, and they feel like they have to like run the other way or run to one side, or they can't. They can't be in front of you. It's really quite interesting. Sometimes they ignore the person, and by that I mean things like I'll go out with my fiance and we'll go to dinner, and they'll ask her what I want to eat, and she'll say, "I don't know, ask him." Or we'll be somewhere and they'll ask her the question right away, and just kind of look over me as if she's there to like kind of just take care of me, and that's not really the truth. The other thing is pity. Um, there are a lot of people that'll say things like, "Oh, I feel so bad for you," or "I don't know how you live every day." And the reality is that my life is pretty awesome. I am a young professional. I just turned 30, so I just bought my first house. I'm getting married in next summer. Um, I My gosh, I have a job, which is awesome. I guess drive a car, do all those sort of things. And I think some people are like surprised by that and they almost want to like feel bad. But the reality is that disability is just part of the human experience. And that is probably one of the number one like nuggets that I would give you, is that you really have to look at disability as just a part of someone's life and trying to help them understand what their needs are and who they are as a person, um, to help them achieve their dreams. So the next slide here, looking at how did we get to where we are as people with disabilities. Um, there are laws now that are in place, like the ADA and IDEA and different things like that that have allowed us to have more rights, but we didn't always have those. And we're going to take a look back at what life was like. And I kind of want to stress this because as we look at these things, I kind of want you to remember back to looking at me, someone like me who is now enrolled at a master's program with all of you, or in a certificate program at GW. I'll put it this way: I'm enrolled at GW with all of you, looking at being a professional and and doing new things in my life and all these different things. If I was born back in the day, um, chances are I wouldn't have these opportunities now. And I would be in a very different place. So let's take a look at this. This right here is a picture of the cover of the book Christmas in Purgatory, which was written in 1966. I have given Dr. Green a copy of this for you to kind of look at and just kind of peruse, but I also have included some pictures because this is a photographic essay of mental retardation. And I know that that is not the appropriate word, but again, this book was published in 1966, and it was really people went into institutions where people with disabilities were living and took photos in hopes of distributing the photos and distributing the book to advocates and to people, to legislators, to try to make some change. Because the reality is, living life in an institution for people with disabilities was not a positive experience, and that's putting it lightly. So let's take a look at some of these pictures. Institutions like the one you see here, pictured. You see a picture on the left of some folks, kind of looks like some unfair treatment going on. Doesn't look like there's a whole lot going on, but institutions back in the day, I think, were well intentioned. They were originally structured to be like a place where families could take their person with a disability and they know that they would be taken care of and then given some level of education and be taught skills. And then quickly, the doctors or folks who were in charge of these institutions realized that the job of educating people with disabilities sometimes can be difficult. So it almost became a means of just they would go there and then their life would be preserved. There would not be a lot of time for them to go outside, do things in the community. Going to school was not really there. Some of these people would be sterilized, tested on, almost like a form of kind of like eugenics or trying to figure out what was wrong with these people. So looking at someone like me who has cerebral palsy, I would have probably been living in a place like this. And uh, I really can't stress enough how bad it is. I mean, because if you look at this picture, there's a picture of a person in what appears to be a room that kind of resembles a prison cell. Um, and the worst part I think about this for me is that, wow, the independent living movement and disability rights movements have worked to eliminate institutions, close them down. Things that are very, very similar to this still do exist. They are out there. They're kind of hard to find, but they do exist. The other thing is that a lot of people with disabilities are living in nursing homes or were. This new focus on community living and community access, I shouldn't say it's new. It's been the call of independent living for a long time, but community-based experiences and making sure students are mainstreamed in school and inclusion are all kind of newer things, but it's all a move to get people away from the idea of living in an institution or working in a sheltered workshop and things like that. So you can see some of these pictures are just horrific. I'm not sure if Bridget at this time in the semester is showing you the picture that's on the right, but you can see this kid is kind of just, or man, is in like fecal matter and is looks like he's tied to that bench. And people weren't always clothed, and were kind of just left to be there. So it wasn't a real enriching life for people with disabilities during the time of institutions. So the independent living movement or the disability rights movement, they're kind of somewhat interchangeable in this conversation. When and why did the movement start? It began in the 1960s because people were coming back from war, soldiers were coming back from war, and they might be now an amputee, they might have a brain injury, they might have to use a wheelchair because they're paralyzed now. And they were coming back and they really wanted to have the same jobs they had before they left for the service, for the war. And they were coming back and realized that jobs and other things weren't necessarily available the same way. They couldn't get into buildings anymore. They really were trying to struggle and gain full citizenship again because they felt like they weren't being treated equally. They weren't given autonomy, and they really didn't have access to public life. And the whole phrase "nothing about us without us" was created because I think some people felt like doctors were always making choices for people with disabilities on a regular basis. So it makes it interesting when you think about this that if people are making decisions for you all the time, do you really feel like you're included? So really always kind of keep that in your head when you're working with students, whether it be at IEPs in a classroom. Are you considering what they're thinking in your everyday decision making about them? Because it is truly about them. So you kind of have two parts of this. You have the soldiers, and this is really like simplifying this history piece. There is the soldiers that are coming back from war, And then there is the people that are living in institutions. And so they're almost like people that are in institutions, they're separated from society. And they started to hear about all these things that were happening about people that were coming back from war asking for equal access to public life. And these people that were living in institutions were like, um, they came together to improve the lives of people with disabilities, and they used their anger, their. I mean, can you imagine living in an institution for 20 years and then realizing that there is a way out? I've heard people with disabilities who have lived in institutions before kind of describe it like it's a prison. Can you imagine the opportunity that they now have to find their way out and to be a part of the community and to be angry about where you've been all your life, but then using that anger and that passion to make a difference in your community? And now these pictures you see on the screen there, I'll kind of explain who these people are, and we'll get into why their pictures are here. This is just pictures of people actually at rallies um, demanding equal rights for people with disabilities. Now, the one thing that the people that may have never been exposed to this before, they see the independent living movement and they think about only people who use wheelchairs or have mobility related issues. And that couldn't be further from the truth. People were just trying to get equal rights and equal access for all people. So don't think that Centers for Independent Living or ILCs are just about people with physical disabilities, because they're not. But that doesn't mean that people did not come together back in the day to advocate against transportation barriers. You see the Greyhound bus being blocked there, but then also thinking about not wanting to live in nursing homes and wanting to be a part of the community in a real way. So the pioneers, you saw those pictures in the last couple slides, and the disability rights movement has pioneers just like Martin Luther King Jr. of the civil rights movement. And we're going to look at them. The guy in the hat there is Justin Dart, and the guy next to him is Ed Roberts, and we'll kind of get into both of them right now. Justin Dart is known as the father of the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed in 1990. And the hat that you see him wearing kind of is an iconic thing within the disability rights movement. His wife, Yoshiko Dart, will travel around to conferences across the country and will bring the wheelchairs and a hat and let people take pictures with it. This guy is revered, and there's good reason for that. Justin Dart's family owned Dart Industries, which was a pharmaceutical company. They also bought stock in Kraft Macaroni and Cheese, and I believe we're part of like the inventing group of Tupperware or Rubbermaid, the stuff that you put your leftovers in. So the point of me saying all those things is you can see that we probably have all taken some headache medication. We probably all have eaten macaroni and cheese at some point, and most likely probably have put leftovers away in a plastic container, then reheated them. Justin Dart's family had a lot of money and a lot of wealth, and Justin chose to use his wealth to make change. Now, Justin was a person who had polio, and he didn't just give money to disability rights, he gave money to women's rights and African American rights movements and really connected people. But he really wanted to use his wealth and his family's political connections to have the ADA passed into law. And he was really able to, as a wealthy Republican, link up Republicans and Democrats, so on both sides of the aisle, to see the importance of creating a civil rights law for people with disabilities. And he really focused on promoting leadership and togetherness and community in all that he did. So he is seen as the father of the ADA. So when you're thinking about what the ADA provides people today, I always think of this guy, and I am personally very thankful because I know I wouldn't have the opportunities I do today. The next guy is Ed Roberts, and he is known. It's kind of funny. We have a ton of fathers within the disability rights movement. I shouldn't say a ton, but we have several. So Ed Roberts is the father of the independent living movement, and I gave Dr. Green a link to a video about Ed Roberts. Um, I would like you to take a look at that video and kind of find out who Ed is. Now the video is slightly dated, but it does exactly what it's supposed to, and kind of give you a picture of who Ed is and what he meant to the independent living movement. So go ahead and take a second to watch that video. Now, dramatic pause. I hope that you enjoyed watching the video. But what is a Center for Independent Living? In the video, you heard them talk about that Ed Roberts was the creator of the first Center for Independent Living. A CIL is a disability resource center for people with disabilities with any type of disability of any age. And CILs are mandated by law. They are written into the Rehab Act of 1973, and there are now CILs all over the world. And one of the key factors of a Center for Independent Living is that it's based on consumer choice. And the word consumer, you may, depending on where you work, it would be a client. If you work for OVR, it's a customer. A consumer is, so everything you see is based on the consumer's choice. And the other thing I guess I didn't put on this slide is that CILs are typically nonprofit organizations that provide these services. So we'll kind of get into what they are and what they look like. As I said, it is all based around consumer choice. And interesting facts about CILs, just so you know, at least 51% of the staff are people with disabilities, and they're various disabilities. So by law, 51%, so the majority of staff that work at a Center for Independent Living are people with disabilities, and they must be by law. 51% of a CIL's board members are people with disabilities. So the board of directors that you see running a CIL as a nonprofit are people with disabilities, and it's mandated by law that it's that way. And again, I cannot stress enough, consumers choose the goals they want to work on. It is consumer driven. It is all about people with disabilities being in control of their own lives, but then also having people with disabilities running programs that help them improve their lives. So it's like a real big community thing where people with disabilities helping other people with disabilities achieve independence together. The big move. So all CILs provide 4 core services. The first one being information and referral, or INR. So a person could call my Center for Independent Living and get answers about where to go for transportation, information about VR services, information about programs that are available. So really, if you have a question related to disability, there should be people there that answer your questions and can give you information to point you in the right direction. So it's really an information center. The second thing is peer support. The fact that a Center for Independent Living has 51% people with disabilities working there really lends itself to a natural peer support. Some CILs run peer support groups, but others, it could honestly be a person with a disability calling just to talk about living life with a disability, and that peer support network and those peer supporters are there for people with disabilities. Advocacy. A lot of the work that is done is around advocacy and creating change and making positive impact for people with disabilities. It could take many, many forms. It could be in the area of transportation, in the area of employment, in the area of transition services and different things that are going on. Really, it's about promoting and advocating, talking to legislators about the needs of people with disabilities. And 4 is the independent living skills. So the center I work for provides independent living skills classes. So if somebody wants to learn how to cook, budget their money, do laundry, we have things at our center that help people learn how to do that. But we also will go to people's homes and provide independent living skill support. Travel training, I guess, is another big one too. And I put number 5 on here because there was just a recent thing that came across that there will be a 5th core service added in the area of transition. And this is for youth and young adults and nursing home transitions for adults with disabilities. Now, when I say that there are people with disabilities currently today living in nursing homes and not living in community-based settings on their own in an apartment out in the community. So there's going to be a new 5th core service around the area of transition. One of the key things to realize, though, is that many CILs also provide additional services that are unique to their communities. Now, no matter where you live, each center will provide services. Will provide services of the 4 core. That is a mandate. Those 4 core services, and soon to be a 5th, will be part of what they do. That's a reality. All right, but CILs do provide different services based on their communities. And just for you to kind of see what that looks like, you can, please, I would ask you to take time to go and look at the website for my Center for Independent Living, or LVCIL, just to see the kinds of additional services that we do provide. It revolves around employment and housing, and we do ADA surveys. So a building has a need to be looked at to see if they're accessible for all people and they are following the code of the ADA. We will go in and do a survey, then create a report of giving recommendations of ways they can improve their access for people with disabilities. We're in no way the ADA police, but we'll just give them recommendations on how to do it. The other thing that we do a lot of is outreach and talking about disability awareness, disability acceptance, what CILs do on a daily basis. So please take a minute and just kind of see what we're doing here in the Lehigh Valley. And no matter where you live, like I said, they all do the 4 core, but this is really important because if you're a teacher and you see a need for people with disabilities in the community, you can contact the CIL and help them look at ways to make new programs happen that address needs in your community. But when we say the word independent living, if you watch the video with Ed Robertson, he talked about how independent living really isn't like a concrete concept, it's more of a psychological thing. Believing that being in control of how things are done, it can be done with supports or not, but you're still in control of your life decisions and what's happening for you as a person. Independent living is about that. So if you're thinking about it from a school perspective, when you're looking at a student, you obviously want to be rational in helping them and giving them advice, but you really are not, you're helping them, but I almost see it more as like an empowering thing. It's empowering to help a person with a disability, or give them information for them to make their own choice and to provide them with the supports. But with the fact that a CIL is consumer controlled, if that consumer decides to not follow through on things that we discussed or do things based on, they make their own choice. We're not going to chase them down to make sure they did something. It's really entirely up to them, and them having the power and the ability to make their own decisions. So enough of this PowerPoint for now. I'm going to go and stop sharing my screen, and now you're going to be able to see me again, I do believe. I did this right. A day in the life of a person who works at a Center for Independent Living. It really depends on what kind of programs you're running. For me, a lot of my day is going out to schools and talking to them about promoting leadership and creating a website that is different things. But if you are what we call an independent living site supports coordinator, it's very, very typical for us to get phone calls on a daily basis about ways to help people. It could be about they want to find housing. It could be about they're looking for a job. A lot of it's information and referral, connecting people. And probably the most prevalent things that we see on a daily basis, our doors are being bombarded by people who are on the autism spectrum and want support. And so it's been a very interesting thing to talk to families and consumers about what's out there. And to that end, we do have a lot of things that we can provide. We are a provider of the adult autism waiver, just based on the fact that there's been so many consumers. Um, at LVCIL this last year, we served almost 700 people, and that does not include the amount of ongoing consumer interaction that we have had, whether it be through peer support groups and other things, or the outreach presentations that we do. I know that I have done outreach presentations to to thousands of people. So, but if you're going to bring a student into a Center for Independent Living, how it's going to work is you're going to come in and do an intake. So it's almost like any service agency. And then they're going to ask you what kind of things you're looking for and what they can do for you. And then they're going to connect you to the right people. So they're typically our experts or peer mentors that will help you then find information you need based on that. So it is kind of, it's structured, but it's loose. The other thing to consider is that CILs are funded by various things. In Pennsylvania, CILs are primarily funded by OVR, or the Office of Vocational Rehab. Depending on what state you live in, it dictates who funds your centers for independent living and how the money kind of flows down. But those funds are limited. Some CILs will do grant projects. My project that I work on right now is a grant-oriented project. I am paid for by a grant. I should say my time is paid for by a grant. So it just depends. So there will be funding to do certain things, and there may not be. So if you're going to have a new idea, you might want to think about ways you can connect with them, but they can connect to you. So if that makes sense as a transition professional, that's kind of what it looks like. So a student would go in, or you send a family in there. They're going to do an intake. They're going to ask about what kind of needs there are, and they're going to connect you to either the person that you're talking to is going to help you, or they're going to get somebody else that can, and they're going to give you options, and then there's going to be choices that are made. But there are some realities and limitations into what can be done, as we all know. Centers for Independent Living are still in the system, even though we are inherently an organization that really wants to promote independence and equality for everyone. There are some limitations. So it's not like it's a magical place where you just get services. But if you have an idea for ways to make change, CILs are typically really open to that. And they really want to see things get done. So I hope that kind of makes sense and you're thinking about this in a new way, and that you actually would like to connect and find out where your Center for Independent Living is and what they do. And then also think about how you can connect your school or your agency with that and kind of consider ways to make things better. So now let's do another screen share so that you can see this again. All right. So more specifically, if you're a transition professional, why is this important to you? CIL staff can be invited to your students' IEP meetings. It's totally okay. A lot of times with like parents want OVR to be at IEP meetings at a certain time, or earlier on than OVR is allowed to. A person that is SIL can be invited right away. It's a great place to go to find out information about what's available for people with disabilities in your community. That could be recreation, that could be peer support groups, that could be maybe there's classes that are offered. Maybe they have groups for young people. And if they don't, maybe they need to. Like I said before, it's a great place to bring new and innovative ideas. And SILs can be a great resource for person-centered planning. And I'm hoping that you're kind of, as you're a part of these programs here at GW, you're hearing this word about person-centered planning. But being consumer focused almost requires that everything is person-centered. Now at LVCIL, we do person-centered plans with every consumer that comes in. They do an intake with us. It's going to revolve around a person-centered plan eventually, and what their goals are and what they see. And then a plan is developed based on what the person sees, what their goals and dreams are, what they want to see in 5 years, and what their immediate needs are. So um, it's a great place for all of that. And if you really want to learn about it, a SIL is a great place to kind of have a shift in mindset. And I can't stress this enough that when you're working with students or working with a person in your agency, yes, you're there to help them, but you're more there to empower them. And that can go for the youth you're working with, or that can be the families you're with. Because a lot of families look at professionals as the end all be all in this situation. And they're going to follow, most likely, unless they're a real big advocate initially, they're going to follow what you say. So you really have to model empowerment and help them understand that um, let's look at what independence means for your child. It doesn't always mean, like I said, living on your own or managing your own money, or it doesn't mean not having any supports at all. That's um, really not reality, because you think about your own life, you're always being helped or assisted or given things to help you be more successful. I mean, think about going to the grocery store. Somebody somewhere prepares those groceries for you to then go to the store and buy them. You don't have to go, and you could grow your own produce, but you don't have to. You can make a choice to go to the grocery store and get those things. And I know I'm rambling, but the point is that you have to look at it as, how can I empower this student and this family um, to make their own choice and believe that things are possible, and that um, things can be different and can be great. So that's that. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. Primarily, I hope that you have questions here, and I hope that you enjoyed this a little bit. And I really want, I guess, in the discussion, because I know I'm going to facilitate this conversation. And if you have questions or you have thoughts about a Center for Independent Living or how things work, please let me know. But I'm really interested to know, like, what does independent living mean to you as a professional in the field, as a practitioner? What what barriers have you seen as a professional to independent living? And what are some ways that you've worked around that, or to help people see that independence is possible, and that giving people options and connecting? I'm really interested to see what you guys are doing out there around the area of independent living, um, and uh, and again, the barriers, because a lot of that based around people's perception of what is possible, and what kind of things are you facing, and what kind of things are you doing. So thanks again for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I will see you on Blackboard soon, and we'll be talking. So um, thanks, and enjoy your week. Talk to you soon.